Hello, this is Austin Caskey, back with part 2 of sculpting this rock. Now, what we're going to be doing today is going over a couple of last minute things that have to do with setup, and we are going to be sculpting the primary forms. Now, just as a reminder, one of the things I've done is I've taken this rock and I've created my own reference images, and I'm using both the reference images and the physical rock to kind of gauge what I'm looking at. So I have this right here. This is in PureRef. I will be moving this off onto a second monitor while I work. Well, maybe I'll leave it here. Part of the advantage of having it always float on top is the fact that it can be on the same monitor that you're actually working on. Now, there's one thing that we did not cover explicitly that I kind of alluded to with the last video, and that was masking. And we did a little bit of setup. To mask something, you might imagine you could come up to here and find the mask window, and this is exactly why I'm going to move my PureRef out of the way. It's there, it's on my monitor. I'm going to be looking at the reference quite a bit. So mask, right? This is the mask menu, and if you hold your mouse over it and you linger and you click on it, there's quite a bit of options here. All right, we've been through this a little bit. We've gone in here and we found invert mask. If you'll recall, we actually put that into our quick favorites menu, right, along with another one. I kind of want to explain what we did there right now. So how do we actually mask? Well, there's a couple of different ways. We can hit M for mask. That brings up the mask brush. You'll notice that corresponds with this right here. And we can start painting in. And you'll notice that the mask has a resolution that's set by the resolution of the mesh. So here I have a relatively coarse mesh. But if I were to remesh it by hitting R, and I will be turn my screencast keys on, I apologize. All right. So if I remesh, set the remesh resolution with R, and then I hit Control R to apply it, I'm able to mask at a much finer resolution. And this can be very, very convenient. Now, mask has a couple of other features. If I hold Control, I can paint out the mask. So it's just like the other brushes in Sculpt, where holding Control kind of inverts what the brush does. So you can imagine the positive is that it's adding masking. The negative is that it is removing masking, right? And being able to paint like this allows you to do a lot of really, really nice things. There's also a quick command to completely clear the mask, and this is very common to do. It's Alt-M. Now, if you're like me at all, you like to know where this stuff lives, and logic dictates that it lives in the mask menu. So if we come up here, you can see we've got clear mask, that's Alt-M. We already talked about invert mask. We've got a couple of other options. We can mask by cavity. So if there's a lot of depressions or tight spaces or grooves in your mesh, you can pull those out into a mask. There's a lot of different things in here, and I really do encourage you to kind of explore some of these options. You can do things like grab a mask and cut it out into its own mesh. So if I were to come over here and mask this out, and I were to go mask, mask extract, I can extract that part of the mesh, and you can see it's its own little mesh. And this is actually a pretty common thing to do for doing things like clothing. It's not the only way to do clothing, but it is a approach. So if we come in here and we mask, I'm going to hit Alt-M. So this is really, really convenient. Another thing that you can do is if you hit Shift and A, you're able to pull across the mesh a mask, right? It kind of grows from where your brush was at the start of hitting Shift A to where it ends, right? And if you happen to be, right here, and then you grow it out, you see how that kind of grows from that starting point? Let me find another location, Shift A. Boom. If you do happen to get off of the mesh, when you do this, it defaults to believing that the whole mesh should be masked. Now, why is this useful? Well, it's every so often that you come in here and maybe you're doing a sculpt and it has like, maybe there's a character or something. It has, maybe, let's imagine this is an arm or something, right? And I'm using my snake hook brush for this. I'm just moving this out. And let's say I remesh it. You know, anytime you make a big change to the silhouette, you want to be remeshing. It's just Control R. Now, if I wanted to just grab this really, really quickly, that Shift A operation is a very convenient way for me to grab it. So instead of having to come in here and hit M and paint this in, I can just hit Shift A, start here, and go up to wherever I need it to stop. Now, my resolution is obviously causing some jaggedness there. That kind of thing can be smoothed out as we add more resolution with smooth tools. If I really wanted to, I could come down here and I could do a smooth mask. But we're going to hit resolution issues with this, right? It's not going to necessarily, I haven't had too much luck with that working. To do resolution-based problems, right? Like, if I had enough resolution, I really cranked this up to something really, really fine, you know, we would see that smoothing effect take a little bit more of an operation. And that has to do with the fact that the mask value is stored in the vertices themselves. So, what can you do with this? Well, I grabbed an arm, let's say I want to pose it or something, or do some operation. If I hit Q, that's my quick favorites menu. If you followed along with the first video, I put invert mask into it. I also put pivot to unmasked. Now, I'm going to actually undo that with Control Z so I can show you exactly what that's doing. If I come over here and I grab my move tool, I guess my undo didn't actually undo. Oh well, so I've got this pivot point here that I can use to move things around, right? And if I invert that mask, and I want that pivot point to be related to the area that I've unmasked, I could hit Q, pivot to unmasked, and it moves it into position. From there, I can move it using this tool. I can come in here and grab my rotate tool again, pivot to unmasked. Right? This can be really, really, really effective. In fact, these are very common operations you'll do, and you'll find that as you use more stuff, you want the stuff that you use to have a hotkey, right? So I like to tie these to the alphanumeric number keys, but I'm going to leave it to you to figure out which keys work best for you. I happen to be working on a keyboard with a alphanumeric and a keypad. For those of you who are unfamiliar, this is the keypad portion of a keyboard, and these above the keys are the alphanumerics. Now, if you're on a laptop or a smaller computer with a more compact board, they've collapsed the keypad and the alphanumerics into one. Now, these are distinct keys for Blender. Hopefully you found that if you are working on this machine, you're aware that you can come to input and emulate the number pad. A lot of camera controls are tied to the number pad keys, and those are really, really useful. Because I have a number pad, I am free to kind of use these keys for whatever I want. And normally in edit mode, the 1, 2, and the 3 key that are alphanumeric switch between vertex, edge, and face, right? You know, when you emulate the number pad, those get overridden, so you actually lose that functionality. But because I do have a number pad, I have that in edit mode. But in sculpt mode, you'll notice those don't really do anything by default. And what I've done here is I've come in here and I've right-clicked on these, and I've added a shortcut. And I've just added them to the 1, 2, and 3 key. So my transform tools are tied to the 1, 2, and 3 key. So that's just a little bit of setup. I think I also introduced this earlier, but this pose brush is really, really convenient. By default, it takes in the size, or the radius of your brush, and it tries to build essentially a bone that you can then rotate, right? Kind of sets the offset. This combined with masking is a great way to pose. It's really an excellent tool. All right, so I'm gonna hit Alt-M, get rid of that. Now, there's one last bit of setup before we dive into setting up our sculpt for primary shapes. There is a brush operation called Scrape Fill, it lives right here, that I absolutely adore. And I've talked a little bit about this. The S key, the smooth brush, this one right here, it's kind of your eraser. And it does a lot to kind of get rid of plane changes, right? And as sculptors, a lot of times what we want, we do want relatively smooth surfaces at times so we can see our materials. But we do want to preserve the plane changes that we introduce, and we want to be strategic with the way that we smooth. Things can end up looking a little lumpy if you don't really think in terms of planes at an early stage as a sculptor. And so one of the things that you want to do is you want to come in here and rely on this scrape fill brush a little bit more. Now there's no hotkey tied to this. I'm just going to share with you my personal setup. I like to right click on it. I like to assign the shortcut, and I'll assign W to it. So I'm just going to remove the shortcut I currently have on there and reassign it so that you can see that operation. Remove. And then I'm going to, this is what your menu should look like. I'm going to hit assign shortcut. I'm going to hit W. Now, basically, when I'm sculpting, I have Q, W, 1, 2, 3, and those are some of the buttons I hit the most, as opposed to, you know, in addition to hitting the C for clay brush, M for mask. I will occasionally smooth with an S. F to change sizes of the brush. Shift C is the crease brush. I will occasionally use the inflate brush, which is I. I will occasionally use the grab brush, which is G. But I really encourage you to go through and discover which brushes work best for you. They are all different and they're tunable. If you come over here, you can actually change the way the brushes feel. We'll be getting into things like texture and stuff at a later time. But I've delayed sculpting the primary shape long enough that I think it's time to put it into action. So I'm going to start out with a fresh mesh. So I'm going to go into object mode and I'm going to delete this. Again, I'm holding tab to get this pie menu. And I'm going to hit Shift A to add a sphere. You could really start with any shape. You want to start with something that's going to get you closer to this. And it is, you know, planar, so you might think cube. I tend to like to work with a sphere just to start no matter what. And as I've said, I've got my reference here. And I'm going to actively be looking at that as I go. Now, I'm also going to change my matte cap to something a little bit more descriptive for me. That's this little drop down, clicking on this. I like to work with something that's maybe kind of like a dull clay. And I tend to find that the best way to start sculpting is to identify the primary shapes you're sculpting. I'm going to pick one of my reference images and just pick an angle and kind of work towards that. I'm going to do it with the coarsest mesh possible. That's one of the reasons I like starting with the sphere, is because it has a very coarse resolution, but it's not so coarse I don't even have to remesh to get my first couple of steps in. Now, I am working on something that's asymmetrical. It's a rock, so I'm going to leave these symmetry tools turned off. But I'm just going to start manipulating this into shape and kind of looking at my reference and I'm looking at this reference in particular. And I'm going to try to figure out how do I get close to that shape. And if you can imagine, looking at this reference, if you had to draw this, which I believe the hotkey is Command B. Nope, that's duplicate. Command Shift, Control Shift D. There we go. So it helps to have that sort of lookup. Every time you forget how to do one hotkey in a program, it's written right there. So again, I just right-clicked on the Pure Rough, and I'm going to hit Draw. You can imagine I'm kind of looking at this shape, and I'm trying to imagine, I'm not really paying attention to all these little divots and things. What I want to do is, like, I want to kind of rough in, like, what are the big plane changes? You know? There's a little divot here that I might want to include. You know, if you've ever drawn, some people will do this in drawing, where they call it the envelope method, where they kind of take like a big primary shape view to, and they'll include negative space and everything in it, to kind of understand what they're looking at. And I'm going to do the exact same thing here. I know that there's a plane that kind of roughly goes at this angle. I know that there's a plane here, and I may not have the resolution to describe everything I want yet, but we're going to sneak up on it, okay? We've got that going down, and we've got slightly different angle there, I think. We have the divot going in, and we got to flatten this out a little bit, and then we're going to pull this in and pull that out, plane, and then, you know, this is where drawing and sculpture kind of overlap, is you know, your ability to kind of read form and understand form and present it. You know, I do believe that every sculptor should draw, and I do believe that everyone who draws should sculpt. These skills are really, really interrelated. Yeah, and that's not really like an exact one-to-one. There's definitely angles in here that need to be tweaked. I don't have the geometry to describe every little nuance of this, but I'm getting closer here. And one of the things I might do is, at this point, because I've made big changes, and I am going to keep this relatively coarse, because I've made big changes to the silhouette, at this point I'm going to remesh it. And with that remesh in place, I'm going to see if I can't get a little bit closer from this angle before moving on to another piece of reference. And I do have this here in front of me, so I can try to orient it such that I am looking at the view pictured in the photograph, and got the angle. You know, it can be easy to get lost in a noisy object like this and kind of lose your landmarks, but I've got this ridge as a landmark right here that I'm using to help find my orientation. I've got this chunk, and then some of the other angles are helping me kind of identify how to hold my rock in my hand as I'm sculpting. And this is just a great exercise. Again, you won't always have the opportunity to have something handheld and grippable, but that's one of the things that I think that makes this such a great exercise, is you have the ability not only to look at it in photo reference with, you know, strong lighting so that you can really, really understand the forms. You can also hold it and check it from different orientations so that the pictures are something you can kind of tie together a little bit better without having to guess at it. And another thing that you'll learn to do in drawing class is to project landmarks. So this moment of a change in curvature would be kind of an ideal landmark in a drawing class, right? Like, and what you might do is you might draw what's called a plumb line, a straight vertical line or a straight horizontal line. And I know I got a little wobble in my line there, but it's a way of checking against your reference. And if I come over here and I grab my little drawing tool and I look at that landmark that I pointed and I draw up from there, I can kind of see, like, do I have maybe too much volume to the right side of that line? Yeah, let's go in and tweak it. You don't always have to come in and do this kind of thing, and I really just have the grab brush right now. You notice it's yellow, and I'm just using that to kind of yank my my silhouette around. And so with that, I'm kind of checking. Okay, we're getting closer, right? And don't necessarily want to move that. Now, the cool thing about this is, because I can draw both on my reference and on my 3D model, like I can just keep doing this with my landmarks. If I come over here and I draw a plumb line up, and I know there's a little bit of skewing happening there, nobody's perfect, I can kind of check where I expect that to be. Now, one of the things I might do is I might say, okay, well, this is a landmark I'm more happy with, although, let me move it over a little bit. So let's say that's the landmark. So the top of this is going to be my landmark now. And I'm going to just draw it down with it. And again, I'm just drawing with this annotate tool. It's something that you could certainly put into a quick favorites. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to right click here and I'm going to right click, I'm going to assign or add to quick favorites the remove button so I can very quickly erase. And then I'm also going to add a shortcut here. I'm not using D for anything, so let's assign it to D. Again, the hotkeys change each time. So I can switch into this tool with D. I can switch back into the brush tool with G, or C, or any of the brushes hot commands. But now I have the ability to jump into this annotate tool really quickly. And if I need to clear my lines, I can hit Q, and I've got remove annotation layer right there. Super fancy. Awesome. So I've got this, and I'm checking that, and that feels like the right amount of distance. And this is, you know, kind of measuring with your eyes, right? I am eyeballing it, and part of building these skills in art is getting that hand-eye coordination, right? Now, I don't always draw these plumb lines when I'm sculpting on my own. I will keep a lot of this in my head, but it can be a useful checking tool for when you get stuck on something. So I think I would encourage you to try it. It's really, really helpful. So I'm going to keep moving around, and you know, we're really locked into one view right now, but I'm just trying to kind of manipulate it. And we've made some changes to silhouette, so I'm going to hit a quick remesh on there. So that's Control R, just a reminder. And let's check a couple other landmarks. So if I come over here and I want to check a landmark, like we've got this sort of pivot that changes, and let's see what it goes across. And I think I can hold Shift to get a perfectly straight line. Yes, I can. So if you're drawing in PureRef, you can hold Shift to get into a straight line. I believe that you might be able to do that in Blender. No. It's a very common operation. So you have to deal with my wonk. But I am going to remove those annotations and just draw again. So right now I have that there, and I'm already looking at it. I think I kind of need to lower that a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to just bring this a little tighter down, make sure that that feels right angle-wise, bring that down, bring this up. Again, it's just checking as you go. And again, I'm not worried about all this little dipping in and all this stuff. I'm trying to get to what's called the primary shape. And we're sneaking up on it, right? And that's what we're going to do, is we're going to be very strategic with the way we approach this. So this is obviously a very important landmark. I'm going to hold Shift and draw up. Where does that meet? Well, now we know where it meets. So currently we have this drawn here. And I'd really like maybe to bring it over, actually. So I'm just looking at my thing. So if I draw this down, you can see I need to scoot this on over to match my upper half. And I'm bouncing around between landmarks. Sometimes I'll use the upper landmarks, sometimes I'll use the lower landmarks. Like the top of the shape or the bottom of the shape. And it's good to kind of have these things start to converge towards an agreement, right? So this is angled like this. There's a little bit of a flare out. There will ultimately be a plane here. I hit Control R. All right, we've gotten closer. You know, nothing's perfect, but I don't want to get locked into one view for too long. Now, there's a couple ways of going about this. Next part, if you want to change your view, if you hit Control Alt Q, you can actually look at your rock from all sides all at once. If you're someone that's coming from some other 3D packages, this might be really, really useful for you if you're used to working this way. What we've got here essentially is, I'm going to move my reference. We've got a orthographic view from the front, the right, and the other front, and the top. And we can come in here and we can change one of these views into just normal perspective view, right? And I'm just orienting the camera however I want. And as I make changes in one, I can see those in the other angles. That can be sometimes useful if you're trying to take multiple pieces of reference and have them relate to each other. I'm not quite at that stage yet, and I typically will be working like this for a little bit, not necessarily in an orthographic camera, but it will be kind of useful for me to kind of sneak up on this. So I've got an idea of what that photo corresponds to, and if I rotate around this way, and I'm holding it in my hand, and that's how I know how these photo references link up. I've got these landmarks here, I'm finding those on my rock, and suddenly I know I'm looking at this face, right? So that's a 90-degree rotation. And what I'm going to do is essentially the exact same thing I just did for the other one. I'm going to hit Q to clear that annotation line, And what I want to do is I want to start shaping this to get closer to this look. And I do think it's helpful to draw it out. With straight lines. Boop. It's curving there. And let's try to pick some landmarks. So we have this right here. And that roughly corresponds to just shy of where that goes up and flares. Now, I've made a lot of decisions about how this flares up here, and I don't necessarily, what I'm seeing from this angle that looks like this is actually a little bit more inset to the rock here, is what I'm discovering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find my angle that I'm going to keep working at, and pull it up, and I'm going to pull this in, right? I want it to stay about the same height, but kind of fit more in line with where that ridge is actually on the rock. And let's think about this. This comes in a little bit. And boop, 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 boop. If I had to draw that silhouette, you know, it would be like that. And just gonna come in here and start pulling around. We have a little bit of a divot that I did not make out from the other viewpoint, and that's one of the reasons to have multiple angles of your reference. There's information packed into one angle that you will not have in another. So I'm going to keep going around, and I'm going to find other landmarks. There's this point where it comes in, and I want to make sure that I have an idea of where that is. And I like this sort of triangle that's starting to form, right? And so I'm going to kind of try to roughly approximate those angles here. And so I'm going to hit the G key, and I'm going to move this corner to the left. And I'm really focusing on that left-right movement, not the up and down, primarily because we want this to correlate with our other reference that we just did. As I go in, we got this other piece of reference. You know, it looks like it's a little bit lower, drops down a little bit. It looks like it's to the left of my ridge just slightly, right, in the photo reference. And we're going to keep going. Flares out, and that straightens up. This comes out at such an angle that it hits maybe like right about here. Where in the world does that fall? Well, we can see that relative to this, I'd say it's about here, if I just had to compare. It's so much easier to compare the relationships between straight lines like this, right? So I more or less nailed that. You gotta celebrate the little victories, right? And we're gonna have a little bit of a curve there, but I'm gonna try to approximate that curvature with a straight line for now, right? We're kind of trying to sneak up on a planar understanding of what we're doing. Now, I'd like to move this in a little bit and just like straighten this up, but I'm having trouble kind of getting my brush into this little nook and cranny. And this is where masking comes in. I'm gonna hit M. I'm just gonna paint that in. I'm gonna hit G. I'm gonna move that and be able to kind of freely manipulate it without fear of accidentally manipulating or messing up a part of this. I'm going to remesh it. We've done a lot to this geometry, and I'm pretty happy with how that angle looks. And we're going to just keep going and kind of circle around our rock and get closer and closer to this primary shape. So let's look at some other reference. I'm going to be going over to my next piece of reference here, and I really want to check this out. And I'm just going to come to my reference here. I'm going to try to find where this is, and I'm looking for landmarks here. I believe that this is just a slightly different orientation of this. That's the same landmark here. So I'm going to come in here and maybe look at this one. I actually might clear my drawings. So one of the things that you can do here is you can go to hierarchy and delete your drawings. Now remember, we parented these drawings before. They're no longer being useful to me, so I'm just going to delete them. Just with the delete key. will turn my hierarchy off. It's a good way to kind of organize things. So I'm looking at this now. This might have some new information for me. And so enough it does. I find it on my rock in my hand. This is the helpful piece of landmarking, right? And what this is essentially the rock oriented, not this way, but this way, right? I had a logic to how I was laying out these reference photographs, right? And, you know, nothing's one-to-one, but again, I'm kind of looking for, can I get this shape? I'm not worried about local curvature. I'm just trying to get something that approximates the overall form, the primary shape. And I found it on my rock, so I know the orientation of this. And let's take a peek. Well, I can see we already have this peak, and it maybe needs to be going a little bit over. Maybe I overshot it from the other angle, although I am kind of happy with that other angle. So maybe I just need to adjust this side in order to be a little happier. So we'll see where we go. You know, we're gonna sneak up on this stuff. I'm gonna move that up. I want this to kind of flatten into a bit of a plane, right here. This is like clearly an important landmark. And then it needs to come right on in after that. So I'm gonna tighten that in. And where does this landmark lie? Let's find out. I'm gonna hold Shift. And it's pretty far in, actually. So if I were to make that correlate with my sculpt, like, it's kind of where I'm thinking. And so I'm just gonna bring it on in. And, you know, as I do this, one of the interesting things that happen is you start to realize, oh, wow, that is so much closer to that angular relationship, right? It felt right when I was looking at it before, but doing something with this plumb line, it kind of reveals how your brain can kind of play tricks on you as you do this, right? And this is something that anyone who draws a significant amount knows well and true. I'm going to bring that in a little bit. You know, we spend a long time training our hand-eye and our ability to gauge these sort of spatial relationships as artists. All right, so we know we have a plane. I don't think I have quite the right angle here. So I'm going to bring this at a slightly different angle. And we need to flare out a little bit more, right? There's like a change in angle between this point and this point, right? And I'm basically just going to try to manipulate that into my shape. So I'd like that to be a little lower because I kind of like this. So I'll bring that down, and then this needs to be more like halfway-ish, right? And so I'm going to look at those plane changes again, and using my reference, I'm going to figure out where those go, right? And I want to make sure I preserve that angle that I had. And we're getting closer and closer, and it's just about building up these spatial relationships. I think this is obviously very off on my current sculpt. Luckily, it is very easy to correct, right? And I'm going to hit G and scooch this on in. Scooch this on in. Scooch this on in. Now, there are things in my photo that are going to make it not the most accurate reference. You know, anytime you shoot something with a camera, there's some distortion introduced through the focal length of the camera. The particular angle that you have it at, where you were standing, might have changed between photographic references. And that kind of, you can either let that bother you and like really fixate on it and try to fix these things, or you can be an artist and accept that there is going to be a little bit of variation between what you're producing and what you see, but you can get close enough that, you know, through careful observation, you're going to be fine. That's my attitude about it, right? People talk about the artist as sometimes like a lens, in sorts, and that it will distort no matter what. I think that's kind of unavoidable, right? That's part of why we do this stuff, honestly. So it's clear, I drew a line there that kind of checks this, like it's clear that we need to go low here. We can even check where that is relative to the vertical. And if we kind of use these elements to triangulate where we should be, let's put it right there-ish. So, you know, it's a very strong way of working this sort of envelope and plumb line thing. And you end up having to do it less and less at the like smaller shape stage, because once you have the primary shapes, you have a lot of landmarks that you can react to and trust that they're in places they need to be. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit, and now I'm going to hit Q and bend my annotation layer, and let's check this next angle. I suspect this is going to be a place of significant change, right? Alright, so I'm rotating my rock, and I'm finding this angular relationship again. Like, where is it? And it corresponds to essentially this angle, right? It's not quite fully rotated, but we're getting kind of closer. And there's some clear indicators of things that I'll need to introduce. So if I Control-Shift-D here, you know, this ridge line doesn't currently really exist in my work. It's in shadow in my reference, part of the reason I have a physical thing here. There's a pretty clear plane here if you look at it in relatively neutral lighting that's missing. And I just need to make sure that is a clear separation right here. And remember, we talked a little bit about this sort of drawing the planar changes onto the reference. This is active looking. We are actively looking at this stuff and learning a little bit more about it. So before I do anything, I've made some big changes to my silhouette, so I'm going to hit Control-R and make sure that I lock those in. Now here, I want to look at this relationship, and it's clear this curvature is going a little bit too far out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it more in line with what I'm seeing in my reference up to a point. And you know, if I look at this, like that clearly comes in as it does in my current model. This clearly is a little bit longer, so I'm going to make sure that I pull this out. I had a little masking on there that I had left, right? And sometimes, you know, changing one view from another view will introduce mistakes from that orientation, right? But the more you kind of step through this, the more you'll converge. So I'm kind of liking that. I like this, but I don't want to move it. I'm going to mask, so I'm going to hit G. I want to bring this down sharply to be more in line with what I'm seeing in my reference. And we're going to get that angle right here that we have, so I'm going to make sure that I check that angle, then that angle, and then that angle. So we can just double check where that is. So if I were to draw that on my model here, I can go boop, probably more like this. Neither of those. More like this. I'm going to take my time with my lines. So I'm going to bring that up, bring this down at an angle. I want to figure out where this exists. About right here-ish, right? So if I come over here and I draw a straight line, you can see it's kind of where I'm thinking. And you know, these lines, sometimes they're necessary and sometimes they're really not. Sometimes this is the stuff that you're like, oh wow, that's where I would have put that, you know, if you're double checking. But I think it's a great visualization of what's happening in my brain as I'm looking at these reference points. And the more you can do this in your head, the faster you'll get. But while you're getting used to and comfortable with this sort of spatial thinking, like, I recommend just making those marks. Like, it doesn't hurt anyone. It's really easy. This obviously needs to go down relative to the rest of it. This needs to go up a little bit. And then I talked a little bit about this. We're starting to get to a point now where we're not so much copying the silhouette, but we're looking for these landmarks here. And let me clear my drawing on my pure ref. So I'm going to hierarchy, clear my drawing. And what I would like is to, I need to remember the hotkey Control-J. I would like to essentially find these major plane changes in my shape now. And one of the things that I've got is I've got a very, you know, measured and kind of careful approximation of what I should be seeing. And so I'm just going to try to find some relevant angles. And I actually might drop down at this point. And it's not that I'm still on the primary shape stage, but I might drop down in resolution. Not a whole lot. And again, you don't have to copy my numbers. It's more of a feeling it out thing. But I'm going to drop down, I'm going to apply that, and now I can come in here with the crease brush and define these major plane changes. So I'm going to hit Shift-C. And what I like to do with this is, you know, by default it carves in, right? But I actually like to run along the ridges of these plane changes by holding Control with this crease brush. And that helps me kind of drive a wedge between them that I can later scrape fill in. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to kind of add this little ridge here, and I'm more or less looking for these kind of interior faces. Again, I'm not looking at all of the little curvature that makes this up, but I'm trying to find where in my model might correspond to these interior plane changes, right? And I'm looking at my model here, and I know that there's like a little bit of a divot here. It's kind of hard to see in the reference, but right here there's like a little bit of a divot that goes down. And so I'm going to make sure that that shows up in my understanding here. Right? Cool. So I've got an idea now. Hopefully you can see it. This little ridge that runs right here. I've got an idea of where that is on my model. And one of the things that I can do to help lock that in after doing this ridge is I can run over to my scrape fill brush. Now remember at the beginning of the video we had assigned it to the hotkey W. If that doesn't work for you, all you need to do is come down here and right click and add the shortcut W. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have this W key, and I'm just going to kind of scrape up to those plane edges, not going over them. And I'm more or less bringing that major plane in line. I'm not quite flattening. There is a flatten brush, but I'm trying to reinforce that planar change, right? And maybe I might come in with the C brush, so we've got some divots there, and just add a little bit more volume back in here. And then scrape fill it again. I'm just trying to build this up so that it is a clearly differentiated plane from the other side of the model, which I'm going to look at as another big plane. And I'm looking at my reference, and I'm looking at my model, and I'm trying to gauge like where are these plane changes happening. And this is 99% of what we're going to do as a sculptor. If I lose my ridgeline, I can go back in and add it back. And the ridgeline's not super important, but it is kind of like how you draw these big plane changes on. I'm looking at my model in real life, kind of thinking about how these things meet, how they go, and this is all kind of one big faceted area until it meets this right here, right? So I want to make sure I find where that is on my mesh, right? If I'm looking at it from this angle. Let's go over here and let's find this. Wrong area, wrong side. It's this side, I apologize. Whew, got lost on my model. That's why it helps to have this thing physically in your hand. This photo corresponds to this side. So I'm just going to come in and I'm going to try to find some of those major plane changes, right? The ones that we laid out here. So if I hit Control-Shift-D, I'm talking about this right here. And that corresponds to, you know, more or less this. I'm going to come in with Control-Shift-C. I'm going to carve this in, actually. I'm going to clear my annotation. I'm going to carve this in. And I'm just using this crease brush to kind of add creases and, you know, kind of carve in. I don't have enough geometry to find a really sharp line, nor do I necessarily want to. But what I do want to do is I want to come in with a W. And along this crease brush, you know, before we were just hitting W and kind of rubbing along that ridge that we added. This time I'm actually going to hold Control and W, I'm going to kind of bring this up a little bit so that it kind of meets at a rift, right? And I notice there's a little bit of a change here, and I'm going to use that Control W to kind of raise that up a little bit, and maybe a Shift C to kind of carve that in, and then W to kind of bring that up a little bit, right? And anytime you need to make big changes to volume, I might come in here, right? I see there's a little bit more of a flat plane to this than what I currently have. I currently have a little bit more cavity. Again, that might have happened. It might have looked right in a certain viewpoint, but I'm going to come in here with the C brush, the clay strips brush, and I'm just going to add in a little bit of volume until I find that correct amount. And you can see I'm kind of adding it in as strips. I'm almost hatching it in, and then I'm going to hit W, and I'm going to scrape fill that in until it becomes flush, right? And for free, that gave me a bit of a plane change here. I do want to make sure that that is meeting at a corner, and at a certain point I am going to have to just kind of turn talking brain off and focus, but you know, this is kind of deep work, right? It's part of what makes making art so fun is you get into these sort of deep focus states. If you can get yourself there into that kind of flow state, the work ends up benefiting, right? Typically, and you are able to achieve more, I think. So I'm going to ridge that. There's a ridge here. I want to make sure that there's a ridge there. And we're going to curve that down. And again, I hope you're following along with your own rock. But I'm going to bring this up. This needs a little bit more volume to it. I'm still thinking about primary shapes. I'm not getting lost in little curvatures, but I am thinking about, like, what are my major planes, and what do I need to do to make sure that they are as voluminous as they need to be, exactly where they're located, and I want to be making active observations as I'm going. And boop. And yep. Shift C again into my ridge tool. And hopefully you can kind of get a sense for how I'm kind of continuing to just do a bunch of the same thing. I'm no longer looking at my photo reference for a second. I'm going to take a break and look at the top. I didn't really get a great photo reference of my top, but I'm going to look at it in real life view. And you know, in real life view, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing it gets kind of nice and flush with this face over here, right? There's kind of a nice rounding that happens, and then kind of has a drop here, so I'm going to Shift C and kind of draw that in. You know, just kind of trying to find my big plane changes, right? I might come in here and flatten this a little bit with the W, you know, scrape fill. Might come in here and shape this a little bit more. I don't really have enough geometry to really get that where I need it to be, but I'm going to keep myself from just adding geometry. Here I want to mask this side and kind of cleave this side a little bit, right? I might need a little bit more geometry there, but for the most part, you try to do what you can with as little geometry as possible, and then take very decisive steps towards something that feels a little bit more in line with what you're thinking. So Shift C, and I'm just going to make that ridge a little bit more visible. I'm looking at this reference, and it's looking pretty good. I might bring this up a little bit, so I might come in here with C, add some strips, just a little more volume, knock it down with a scrape fill, knock this down. There's a little bit of a flattening here, and then What's great about scrape fill is it's very good at, I don't really have any references for the bottom, so I'm just going to keep that flat for now. Maybe I'll make some detail up later. Or I could just look at my actual rock. Just don't imagine we're going to be looking at the bottom. Save time. Alright. Hopefully you can start to see this is converging on something that starts to resemble my actual model, right? And if I'm looking at it, I can start to actually realize what side is corresponding to what. So this is this side, right? You know, some of my angles might have shifted around as I was playing with the flatten brush and stuff, and you know, I want to make sure that I'm respecting those things. But you know, I'm kind of getting that back. Here I can kind of think about like, okay, where are my big plane changes? If I'm going in, I'm going to draw this, more or less. It looks like there's obviously these little platelets where it's cracked. Those are some obvious forms that jump out, but I'm actually going to delay putting those in because I actually think those fit better with a secondary shape pass. Now it's kind of hard to distinguish between the two. The line is fuzzy, but you see how these major shapes are really shaping the light, this harsh light that I've put on there. And yes, these little platelets, they're important and they're large and they jump out at you as features, but they're not really defining the form, right? They're kind of sitting on the form. And I'd say that's the best way to gauge the difference between primary and secondary is like how much influence does it have over the form read. So what I can do with this very sort of strategic way of approaching form is I can say, okay, I can wait to put those on until I have a little bit more of this knocked in, and then it will make more sense and be more readable of how to put that in. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to hit Shift-C with my brush, and I'm going to try to capture that big form change that I was talking about, right? And so I'm going to hit Shift-C, I'm going to hold Control so I have a bit of a ridge, and I'm looking at it from multiple angles now. I'm not just fixed to one side that's kind of emulating my camera view, but I'm trying to find a more or less straight, there's a little curvature to that I just knocked in there because. And from this view, I'm starting to see how that sort of divot in the light forms, right? You know, we have this little cavity here that meets here. I just want to make sure that I shore that up as much as possible with a strong plane change between the two. And I'm just coming in with a scrape fill brush, and I'm running along the side of these and knocking in these forms. All right. So that's where I'm probably going to leave us today. Hopefully that was helpful. I'm going to keep kind of tweaking this a little bit, and probably do it on camera. But we'll be ready to move into the secondary phase sooner rather than later. And as I'm moving this around, you know, it's not a perfect digital double, right? There's certainly some more work we can do here. This line that we have here is not super well defined. I'm going to hit Control R here. And it corresponds to this, of course. Again, you start to learn where the landmarks are and what the landmarks are, right? And you start to develop a language with the piece. And it's hard to sometimes share that language verbally because the landmarks are like, look at this little bump, you know? But this comes from careful observation, right? And if you've ever drawn, you've done something like this, right? And I am just in that mindset right now. And I'm going to kind of find these ridges, and I'm really just using this crease brush to help me separate major planes. And I'm going to come in, boop, 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 scrape fill. It's helping me kind of make those planes into one. And I'm noticing a little bit of a turning of form there. I want to make sure I have a plane for that. right? There's a subtlety to some of this, right? But being patient and observant is a great way to find this stuff, right? And just kind of coming in and knocking this stuff in. And, it's not so important that the ridges are there in real life or not, or right now I'm kind of exaggerating where these are, so I can better find my landmarks, right? And that's where I'll conclude today. I'll pick this up again, hopefully very soon, and get the rest of this rock sculpted.